Well, good morning. Something a little bit different today. I thought we'd have a nostalgic look back at how my plot has evolved over the years. So this is the recent film of the plot. You can see the fruit garden and the squash bed at the back. And of course, I've got a shed and fairly substantially developed no-dig beds throughout the rest of the plot. And of course the chicken coop and the polytunnel. So this is how we know it today. But of course it didn't start this way. So this is the plot that I originally took over. You'll have to excuse the photographic quality. At the time the camera wasn't that good. And you can see here that it was pretty well overgrown. There's some corrugated iron around, a bath in the soil. But I got on and cleared it and turned the soil over for the first time. And of course that soil was really good for having laid fallow for some considerable number of years. And gradually I got on top of it and created myself this bed and trimmed around the outside, and things got underway. And you can see here the red currant bushes in the background. They're still there today and still cropping really well. So I started putting some crops in and gradually starting to develop. You can see my old dog there, Wesley, who's sadly no longer with us. But the canes went up and I got on. And the top left-hand corner of this picture, you can see there's a couple of small beds. They didn't belong to me at the time. That was an elderly couple and they didn't carry on for very much longer. In this image, if you look to the top, you can see the fruit garden area, which at the time again belonged to somebody else, and they were working it well, and therefore it wasn't causing me any problems. Here you can see a shed in the background. This wasn't in fact my shed. This belonged to another plot holder. It was fairly rickety. It was leaning over as far as I can remember. It didn't stay up for too much longer, but it certainly wasn't mine. And you can see in the next image I started to work on a base area for a shed on the right hand side there, and it required me to level the ground off because my allotment is naturally on a slope. But after not too long I got it level and started to think about buying a shed, which eventually I bought off of eBay. It was fairly rickety. So this is where I currently have the courgette mound. Ironically, it was an open bed before that time, and that's where I'm going again now, although I did get a lot of bricks out of there. Crops grew well because the soil was virgin soil, and if I remember rightly, we had a really good crop that year of most things. Now the shed, I put down some fairly hefty concrete slabs to act as a base, and they're still under the shed to this day, and they've sunk a little bit, but not too bad. I remember they weighed a ton, but we eventually got them in place. So the shed eventually arrived and it needed quite a lot of repairing. It was rotten in a number of places, and you can see there the lower level planks I had to replace, and indeed inside you'll see that the back of the shed needed an awful lot of replacement. But we got that done and eventually got it together, and the shed turned out well. And to this day, it's still serving me well, although the roof probably needs some attention now. But there we are. That's the way of sheds. Well, we certainly had a good season of red currants that year, and the blackbirds enjoyed them as well. You can see one here tucked in the bush. The plot, it developed, and I gradually took the crops out, and you can see how much weed growth there is on my patch here. And one of the reasons that drove me towards no dig, because it certainly recovers to its natural habitat very quickly. You can see over the back there, the couple that were working that space hadn't really grown very much. They'd been digging, but not getting much produce out of it. And that space eventually came my way, and I snapped it up thinking that the extra space would be really useful, and I had a polytunnel in mind at that stage. So taken from above my plot, at this stage you can see that somebody was still working where I currently have the fruit garden, but this gives you an idea of the amount of growth that was achieved that summer, and I soon took over the extended piece of plot. And you can see, to start with, I grew crops in there, and that formed the shape of the two areas that I currently work on the allotment. And I had this protection around the beans, protecting them from the wind that year. You can see how much mowing and grass cutting there was to be done here, and that was a disadvantage. I got myself a couple of water tanks, and somebody donated me a greenhouse, a good friend of mine. It was a perspex greenhouse, and it didn't really stand up to the wind very well. I remember one bad winter I found it in the middle of the plot in a crumpled mess, but I managed a good season's worth of seedlings from it. Here you can see the courgette bed in another incarnation with wooden slats around it. So the greenhouse sat nicely in the whole of the beds, and I managed to put another few beds around it just to expand the growing space. But altogether I was very pleased how things were coming on at this stage, and I started to develop what I was going to do at the other end of the plot. And soon enough I managed to get hold of the polytunnel, and to this day it's been a great asset to the whole of the plot. Now if we go back to this image and you look over the green corrugated iron, you can see the jungle that existed at the back of my plot. And I worked on this very hard during the winter, and when it was raining I was in the garage building the coop, and this was where I was going to put the chickens in the long run. Eventually I got that space cleared and put some pavers down to make the base so that I could walk round the coop in the winter months, constructed the coop that I've been building in the garage and got it into place, and that's been the chickens' home ever since. Well, the gardening was very traditional with digging and crop rotation, but I do remember there were an awful lot of weeds, and it used to take me a lot of time to keep on top of them with this style of gardening. However, the crops were still very good, and here's a few of the harvests that we had over those years. The chickens soon settled in. In fact, one of the hens decided that she was going to lay an egg in the shed, but she soon got the hang of things and went in the coop. That winter I did the beds for the no-dig garden. Got to the point where I was getting a bit cheesed off with all the weeding, and this was the way forward for me, and I've never looked back since. But it was a pretty harsh winter, and there was snow on the ground in the area for a very long time. I still managed to get some digging done, and I remember distinctly going out one day and my feet feeling like two frozen blocks. Well, it was a woodworking time, so I made the cold frame at the same time as I was making those beds. But the beds were my main focus, and I got them finished and also got the chippings around them, which prevented a lot of mowing and obviously stopped the weed growth. And looking onto the other bed behind, that was my next objective. I put together this little project at the same time, and this is inspired by Tamara and her YouTube channel, The Swiss Plot, which is a fantastic channel if you've got the time to go over and have a look. So the beds developed well, and the bed at the back there, I started to put some chippings down and create myself some paths. So this is a slightly different style of no-dig. The weather, still snow, and we had a few months of quite hard weather that winter, and you can see the squash bed got completely covered, and from time to time I had to check the nets weren't under too much pressure. Well, no-dig has been a great success, and I've not looked back, and I would recommend no-dig to anybody. And you can see the beds here are fairly easily maintained, and the squash bed with the covers on, I've done a recent video on, and that's very successful too. I did a couple of other woodwork projects. You can see this bench which is on the plot, which was reclaimed from pallets. Well, that's quite a few years past, and this is pretty much up to date with the plot working well as a no-dig plot. And I certainly enjoy the time I spend on it. Hope you've enjoyed this. I do hope you enjoyed the video today. If you did, click the subscribe button, click the like button, and if you want updates from me each time I upload a video, click the bell and select all.
I do hope you have a great day. Diolch yn fawr.